In regards to the 12 tribes of Israel, we understand through history that they were two captivities, and they were two kingdoms. There was the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel, which made up the 10 tribes. Now, the kingdom of Judah predominantly consisted of the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Levi, and a smattering of Benjamin, a dash of Benjamin, if you will. The other 10 tribes was considered the northern kingdom, and they consisted of the other 10 tribes of Israel. Now, because of their disobedience and breaking the Mosaic covenant, according to Deuteronomy chapters 27 and 28, God said, if you disobey me, you'll eventually be taken off into exile, into a foreign land, into a foreign country. And all this came to pass for both kingdoms. Judah was taken into Babylonian captivity. Israel was taken into Assyrian captivity. Now, what had happened is later on down the road, the kingdom of Judah was released from Babylonian captivity and allowed to return to the land of Israel, into Jerusalem, and they and their descendants are who we recognize as the Jewish people today. Now, the Assyrian captivity never officially came to an end, and as a result, the 10 tribes of Israel has been scattered throughout the entire world. Within the thousands of years that have taken place since the beginning of the Assyrian captivity, the people of Israel, the 10 tribes, have been able to spread themselves across the entire globe, therefore mingling with virtually every people group on the planet. Now, many people have a double standard when it comes to the Word of God, and specifically God's law, God's instructions, the Torah. They say the Torah is only for Israel. The Torah is only for the Jewish people. But I disagree with that, because when the Torah was given, yes, it was predominantly given to Israel, and they are the primary recipients and the primary custodians and caretakers of the Torah, of God's commandments, of God's law, of the Mosaic covenant. But if you read the passage carefully, it indicates that while the Torah was being given by God to the people of Israel at Mount Sinai, it was as if God saying, okay, here are my laws, here are my instructions. Are you willing to place these laws and these instructions upon yourself and to obey them? Will you enter into a covenant with me? Obviously, Israel said yes. But if you read the passage carefully, there was also a mixed multitude that came out of Egypt with the children of Israel. They too were there at the foot of Mount Sinai when the law was given. They too, along with Israel, accepted the law upon themselves. Now, it is believed that the mixed multitude was made up of the 70 new root nations of the world. So in other words, the entire world, at least one representative from all the nations of the world, were at the foot of Mount Sinai when the law, when the Torah was given. And not only did Israel accept the law upon themselves, but the rest of the world did too, as there was at least one representative from the 70 root nations that made up the mixed multitude that were there when the law was given. They too gladly accepted it upon themselves. And just as Levi tithed to Melchizedek, which is an older and higher order of priesthood, because the scripture says that Levi was still within Abraham's loins, and through Abraham, Levi tithed. So in the same way, the principle stands with the mixed multitude and with the children of Israel. Because the children of Israel were there, they represented all the descendants that were to come. Therefore, Torah was obligatory and incumbent upon every member of Israel. Just the same, the mixed multitude was there, at least one representative from the 70 root nations of the world. They too represented all of the descendants that were to come after them, and just as they accepted the Torah upon themselves, therefore, all of their descendants that were to come from them, the Torah is obligatory and incumbent upon them. And over, God said within His law that there shall be one law for the Israelite, for the native, and for the sojourner, for the stranger, for the alien, for the permanent resident that sojourns among them. So as long as the mixed multitude traveled with Israel, worshipped the God of Israel, and took the commandments of the God of Israel upon themselves, they were obliged to obey that law and to follow the same law that the Israelites did. So now here we are, thousands of years removed from Mount Sinai, 2,000 years removed from the day of Pentecost and the establishment of the Nazarene Torah obedient movement of believers in Messiah Yeshua. The majority of Christendom says that that the Torah was only given to the Jews, that it's only obligatory to the Jews. It's Israel and only obligatory to Israel. The Gentiles don't have to follow God's law. That's made clear in Acts because the Gentiles were only given 4 laws, which that passage is totally misunderstood and taken out of context, and is glossed over very quickly without understanding the fine details of what those 4 laws meant. Those 4 laws did not replace the 10 Commandments, obviously. Those 4 laws, therefore, were not exhaustively the only laws that Gentiles were obliged to follow. In short, these 4 starter laws solved a problem because there was such an influx of Gentiles coming to believe in Messiah Yeshua. You had a lot of customs and traditions of the Jewish people that kept them separate from the Gentiles, and if they mingled with the Gentiles, they would become ritually impure and unclean, therefore unable to participate in activities and worship at the temple, and so they stayed separated. So as to solve this problem of ritual impurity, the Messianic, the Nazarene Sanhedrin, if you will, the elders said, okay, these are the only 4 laws that Gentiles have to obey and follow immediately. And it was, to abstain from fornication, things strangled with blood. Most of it had to do with idolatrous worship. And interestingly enough, it had to do with kosher food, which is one thing that Christendom says that you don't have to worry about anymore, that's been done away with. But yet, the kosher laws were reiterated within the 4 laws given to the Gentiles, interestingly enough. So these 4 starter laws, I call them, that the Gentiles, believing Gentiles, were to obey and follow immediately. They were to make a clean break with paganism and everything pertaining to paganism, so as to not make Jewish believers ritually impure, so they could not participate in worship and activity at the temple. And if you read the passage, if you read the rest of the passage carefully, it says that we're not going to worry, and I'm paraphrasing, we're not going to worry about the rest of the Torah right now because we realize that every Sabbath they attend, we go over the Torah portion. And, within a year to 3 years, they are going to eventually learn all of the commandments in the Torah and learn how to obey them in their own lives. So we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to worry about these 4 immediate laws. So they were even planning and realized that the Torah was incumbent not only upon them as Jews and Israelites and Hebrews, but was incumbent upon the Jewish believers that were coming into the faith. They were eventually going to learn all of the commandments from one Sabbath to the next. Okay, so thousands of years removed from Sinai, thousands of years removed from the day of Pentecost, Shavuot. We have legends of these lost 10 tribes. Even James, Yaakov, opened his letter to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Not just Israel, not just Levi, but all of the tribes of Israel who've been scattered abroad, which means they were scattered over all the world. So at that point in time, it was pretty much understood that we knew basically where all the 12 tribes in the world were at that time. Since that time, we have lost track, and a lot of these lost 10 tribes have been assimilated into the lands and the peoples that they've mingled with and found themselves in. But here, in this modern day, there's a lot of subgroups within these people groups of the world that say, hey, we're a little bit different. We're a part of this people group, but we're considered outsiders. We're ostracized. Our customs and traditions are a little bit different from the majority. And they're coming out and saying we are Manasseh, or we are Ephraim, or we are Gad, or we are part of this lost tribe or that lost tribe. And the customs and traditions that they have will totally line up with Torah. and will totally attest to there being a lost tribe. But the thing is, scientifically in DNA, there is no baseline DNA for the 12 tribes or the lost 10 tribes of Israel. We have a DNA baseline for Levi and for Judah, and so that's easily recognizable. We can recognize through DNA who is of Levi and Judah. But as far as the other 10 tribes, there's no genetic baseline that we have that we can say, oh, well, he's a Gadite, or he's a, so we can't necessarily go by DNA profiling in regards to finding the lost 10 tribes. So we have to go on, other evidences such as, cultural parallels and oral history and things of this nature. So with this Assyrian captivity never coming to an end, and therefore the 10 tribes scattering over all the world, and therefore assimilating and becoming a part of virtually every people group on the planet, the 70 root nations, it's as if the Lord said, fine, if you're going to create a double standard and you're going to say that the Torah is only for Israel, it's only for the Jews, fine, I can work with that. You're totally wrong. You totally misinterpret the scriptures. You're totally not, getting what was written down at the beginning. But fine, I can work with that. I can deal with that. For these 10 tribes that are scattered abroad, I'm going to scatter them across the whole world, and they're going to mingle with all the 70 root nations, and therefore there is going to be a representative of the 10 tribes throughout the 70 nations, which is going to make the Torah once again obligatory upon the 70 nations, because you're saying, oh, the Torah is only for Israel. The Torah is only for the Jews. Fine. If it is, then I'm going to make Israel a part of all the other nations, and therefore, again, making all the other nations obliged and obligated to obey and keep the Torah, because the Torah was meant for mankind, not just for Israel, not just for the Jewish people. So if you want to go with the argument that the Torah was only for the Jews and only for Israel, for the Hebrew people, if the 10 tribes have assimilated and have mingled with all the 70 root nations, how can you tell them apart? How can you tell somebody of pure Gentile stock and somebody from one of the lost 10 tribes of Israel? So how can you say, well, only the Gentiles don't have to keep the Torah? Well, if Israel has mingled with all of the 70 root nations and has become a part of these 70 nations and part of the Gentile people, then how can you tell the lost tribe from a pure Gentile stock person? You can't. You can't make that distinction because, again, we don't have the DNA profile or baseline for the lost 10 tribes. So how can you say, oh, well, you're not supposed to keep Torah, but you are? How can you make that distinction? If the Torah is only for Jews and only for Israel, and Israel has become a part of the 70 nations through mingling throughout these thousands of years and being scattered abroad, how can you then say, well, you're a Gentile, you don't have to keep the Torah? Well, what if they're one of the lost tribes and they just don't know it? What if they are one of the lost tribes and they just can't tell? Then that would be a great disservice, and a Hebrew and an Israelite would be not keeping the Torah that was given to them. So to err on the side of caution and to be on the safe side, once again, we have to admit and say that the Torah is obligatory for every person on the planet, because if you're saying it's only for the Jews and only for Israel's and only for the lost 10 tribes, well, those tribes have been scattered abroad and mingled throughout the 70 root nations of the world. And so how can you tell one from another? How can you tell a lost tribe member from the people that they have found themselves in the community and the people group that they've assimilated into? You can't. Because see, you have Hispanics, you have Chinese, you have Native Americans, you have African Americans. There are subgroups within these people groups who have oral histories and traditions and customs that link them to the lost 10 tribes of Israel. There are many all over the world within people groups saying that we're Israelites. We believe we're from this tribe or from that tribe. We're from Gad. We're from Asher. We're from, Zebulun. We're from Naphtali. Whatever. And they're starting to come out of the woodwork, and some of them have been officially recognized by the state of Israel, as being part of, one of the lost 10 tribes, and they're being permitted to immigrate to Israel. So if that's the case, and there are Hebrews walking around the planet who don't even know it, Israelites who are part of the 70 root nations and other people groups, how can we then say that, the Torah is only for the Gentiles? Because the Gentiles have become a part of Israel now. Through this mingling, you can't differentiate them or tell them apart. By telling a Hispanic or a Chinese or an African American that they can't follow the Torah, you would risk saying that you can't follow the Torah because you're not a part of Israel. But how do you know that they're not a part of Israel? How do you know that one of the lost tribes haven't mingled with that people group? Therefore, you would be telling a Hebrew and an Israelite not to keep the Torah. And a lot of people will say, well, what about the Pauline letters? What about Galatians specifically? It seems very anti-Torah, and it doesn't look like that Paul taught the Gentiles to keep Torah. Again, you're reading with a biased mindset, because we have been raised and taught to believe that Paul was antinomian, that he did not teach Torah to the Gentiles. Therefore, we have been reading it as such this entire time, and have not been reading it through the eyes of Torah. Reading it through the eyes that Paul was actually encouraging them and telling them to keep the Torah. When we take Paul out of context, we do a great disservice. Peter even said in one of his letters that Paul's writings are hard to understand and already have been taken out of context to people's damnation. Paul went to great lengths to prove that he taught Torah, that he wasn't teaching people not to keep the Torah. He underwent a Nazirite vow and sacrificed at the temple to prove such a thing, to prove that these rumors being spread about him that he was telling people not to keep the Torah was a lie. He said, I'm a Pharisee of Pharisees, I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews, I'm a Benjamite, I was circumcised the 8th day. He didn't say I was a Pharisee, he said I am a Pharisee. So he was still a Torah-obedient, practicing Jew. And he taught others that too. It's just that the main thrust of the Pauline letters is that people were putting works righteousness before faith righteousness. You had the Abrahamic covenant, which represented faith righteousness. And you had the Mosaic covenant, which represented works righteousness. Just as James says, faith without works is dead. You have to have your works to back up your faith. So a lot of these people were trying to be justified and righteous before God by keeping the Torah without having faith. They were putting the cart before the horse. They were putting the Mosaic covenant before the Abrahamic covenant. They first had to have faith. And when they had faith, they could back up that faith by the works. And so we also misunderstand a lot of the verbiage in Paul's letters, like under the law. Well, under the law meant under the penalty of the law. What's the penalty of the law? Death, right? The works of the law. How does the law work out in your life? For obedience, it works out to life. For disobedience, it works out to death. It's how the law works and operates in your life. So, in short, the Pauline letter specifically has been taken grossly out of context, and has painted Paul as teaching against the law for Gentiles. But that's not the case. That's not the way it was at all. So he even taught the Gentile people to be Torah obedient. Now, he was an apostle to the Gentiles, as Peter was an apostle to the Jews, to the circumcised. So if the 12 tribes were scattered abroad and the 10 tribes were scattered through Assyrian captivity into all parts of the world, and they were assimilated so much to the fact that they just appeared to be just the same as the people group whom they found themselves in and lived among and assimilated into, and Paul was ministering and starting congregations among these peoples, how was he to know, or how could he know who was a Gentile and who was a lost tribesman? He couldn't. So if he was to teach these Gentiles not to keep the Torah, he was at risk in teaching his own lost tribesmen not to keep the Torah, which was obligatory upon them. And I don't think he would have done that. Not only that, but when we see Gentile, depending on the context of Scripture, sometimes Gentile alluded to a Hellenist. Now, what a Hellenist was a Jewish or Israelite person who assimilated into to the Gentile culture, so much so that they were just considered Gentiles because they lived like a Gentile. Might as well call them a Gentile, they're living like Gentiles. So you have to take that into consideration also when reading the Scripture. And I'm sure that these congregations that Paul was starting on his missionary journeys, that maybe the majority of them were made up of quote-unquote Gentiles, but I'm sure you had some Jewish believers within these congregations, and for him to set a precedence for a double standard, saying, okay, well, you have two different peoples in your congregation, Jews and Gentiles. Well, the Jews have to follow the Torah, but you Gentiles don't have to worry about that. Creating a double standard within the congregation, which isn't right and is not compatible or livable or doable without there being major conflicts within the congregation as a result. And also that would, make the Jewish people more superior in a way, because they would be considered the chosen people and they have to keep God's laws, they're the custodians. But you Gentiles are second-class citizens and you don't have to keep it all. You're just along for the ride. You're riding on our coattails. That would not be right. There's one law. There's not a double standard for Jew and Gentile. Even Messiah said, Jew and Gentile have become one in Messiah. Not abolishing the law, because Matthew 5, Yeshua said, I didn't come to abolish the law and the prophets. I came to bring it into its full, complete meaning so that you could live it, so you could walk it out. And he said that you are one new man in Messiah, Jew and Gentile. There's no longer any distinction, which would further back up the fact that there's just one law. And that was said from the beginning, from the Torah itself, one law for the native Israelite and for the sojourner, the stranger, the foreigner traveling among them. So if these Gentiles are coming into the family of God, they would be under that one law. And again, it's faith in Messiah Yeshua that saves us, not obedience to the law. But the law is like marriage vows. We obey them out of loyalty, love, and fidelity to our spouse, not because we don't keep the law to be saved. We keep the law because we are saved. Because faith without works is dead. We show our faith by our works. We back up our faith by our works, not that our work saves us. And the goal is not to keep the Torah perfectly. That's not the goal, because we can't do it, because we're sinful, fallen human beings. We're eventually going to break the law. We're eventually going to fail. But saying that, it doesn't mean that the law is impossible to keep. A lot of people argue, well, we're not supposed to keep the law anymore because it's impossible to keep. No, it's possible to keep the law. It's just impossible for us to keep it perfectly because we are sinful, fallen human beings. There's nothing in the law that's impossible for us to do or accomplish. We can do every single commandment in the Torah. It's not impossible. And even Paul reiterated the words of the Torah, says, the law is very near you. It's in your heart, in your mind, so that you can do it. God told Moses that the Torah, the law, is your life. You can do it. It's not impossible to keep. But it is impossible in the sense that we cannot keep it perfectly, because we are fallen, sinful human beings, and we will sin, we will fall, we will make mistakes, we will break covenant. That's because of our fallen nature. It's not that the law is impossible itself to keep. It's doable. God would not take the children of Israel out of Egyptian slavery and bondage only to put them into a spiritual bondage called the law. That would be a grossly sadistic God to pull a dirty trick like that. Well, I'm taking you out of physical bondage and slavery of Egypt, just to put you in slavery to the law. No, the law is freedom. Just as we have laws in the Western world that keep us safe, it keeps us from harm and from murder and from anarchy. The law gives us our freedoms. Well, it's the same with the Word of God, and it's the same with God's laws. God's laws gives us our freedoms. So I know that I've rambled on quite a bit, and it might have got a little hairy, a little confusing. Let me just recap. The Torah is for mankind. Israel as well as the 70 root nations called the mixed multitude, was out Mount Sinai when the law was given. Both people groups, both parties accepted the law upon themselves, therefore obligating their descendants to keep the law too. Although Israel is the primary recipients and caretakers and custodians of the Torah, the Gentiles who were there accepted the Torah and was obliged to follow it as well as their descendants. Christendom has made this claim and holds this belief predominantly that the law is only for the Jews, only for Israel, that the Gentiles are not obligated to it, which would be totally wrong and totally contradict what I just said, but that's the major belief of Christendom. They have taken out of context the 4 laws given in Acts to the Gentiles. They totally misunderstood that. It doesn't annul the 10 Commandments or the 613. It just gives them a starting point on being able to keep the 10 Commandments, the 613 Commandments. They immediately keep the 4 laws, and from one Sabbath to the next, within 1 to 3 years, they'll learn how to apply the rest of the Torah commands to their life and to live it out. So, as Christendom has denied that the law is incumbent upon Gentiles and upon believers in Messiah Yeshua, God foreknew this, and He allowed the Babylonian captivity, which was the kingdom of Judah, which was made up of Judah, Levi, and a little bit of Benjamin. And he allowed the Assyrian captivity, which was made up of the other 10 tribes. Babylonian captivity ended. The Jews came back to Israel, to Jerusalem. They are the people that we consider Jews today. The 10 tribes have been lost and scattered abroad and have assimilated and mingled into virtually every people group on the planet, at least the 70 root nations. And so now we have Israelites and Hebrews walking on the face of the earth who are Hebrews and Jews and Israelites and don't even know it. So to tell a Gentile now that they don't have to keep Torah would be a danger of actually telling a lost somebody from the lost 10 tribes who are obliged to keep the Torah, not to keep the Torah. And you would be in danger of telling them not to keep the commandments of God when the commandments of God was given to them at Sinai. So there's no DNA baseline for the lost 10 tribes. We know DNA of Judah and Levi, but we don't have any DNA profiles for the lost 10 tribes. So, you know, when you say that Gentiles don't have to keep the Torah, you may actually be telling a lost tribesman that he doesn't have to keep the Torah, which would be grossly wrong. And so, seeing as the lost 10 tribes have infiltrated and assimilated into virtually every people group on the planet, better to be safe than sorry. Allow the Gentiles to keep the Torah, because you never know, who's part of the lost 10 tribes and who's not. So if you tell a Gentile not to keep the Torah, you essentially may be telling somebody of the lost 10 tribes that you don't have to keep the Torah. And I'm sure the Apostle Paul and the other apostles knew this danger as well. And so their writings have been taken out of context. They actually promoted and told the people to obey God's commandments and God's laws, God's Torah. And they've been taken out of context, and it's been made to say the exact opposite and otherwise. And there are groups of people that are coming out of the Gentile nations who Israel is recognizing as members of the lost tribes of Israel, from the Hispanic community, the Asian community, the Caucasian community, the Hamitic African American community. They're recognizing them as the lost tribes. This has been a very difficult and dicey topic to parse and to try to make clear and plain. And I know I rambled on, and I hope I wasn't confusing, and I hope I was able to lay this out and make my point very clearly in regards to this very important topic and issue. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. Go out there and have a great day. God bless.
Abraham'sDescendants.com, getting back to the first century in a 21st century way.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to press the like button as well as the subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and the notification bell that'll let you know every time I make a new video. And don't forget to share this with a friend. Also, visit our website at Abraham'sDescendants.com. Thanks. Shalom.
Thanks for watching. Stay connected by subscribing to our other social media accounts and visiting our website at abrahamsdescendants.com.